Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Koralik from Figured Out Productions. The following video is a video of some kind, and I hope you enjoy it. Hey everyone, welcome to the Figure It Out cast for January 2020. Happy New Year, everybody. I'm your host, Adam Koralik, and we're going to get all started as we always do, talking about various subjects. Now, at any time, if you're choosing, you can look in the description of this video and see that there are a whole bunch of subject lists with time codes, so you can skip around anything if you want to do that. And so, as always, this is a Patreon-backed podcast, so for Patreon backers, this goes out much earlier, along with my other videos, which go out early as well. It is, of course, released publicly later in the month so that everybody can listen to it if they want to, but I appreciate it as always. And let's go ahead and get started with the first subject on the list here. Well, before we do that, actually, let's just say I hope everybody had a happy new year. I hope all the recent craziness around the world, our hearts go out to people everywhere in Australia, and, with all the situation that's going on with Iran and everything that's been going on, it's chaos. There's a lot of memes about how 2020 started off a little strange, but it seems like the world might be calming down a little bit now, and yeah, that's a good thing. So I hope everybody out there is safe and had a good time, and with New Year's and all that stuff. And let's get back into it. Let's talk some video games and nerd stuff and have a good time. So the first thing to talk about now that I wanted to talk about was that there's been rumors for really since before it came out that the Nintendo Switch was at some point going to get some sort of upgraded version, a Switch Pro, if you will. I don't know why this became such an expected thing now. I mean, until recently, the whole idea of, hey, let's upgrade the console mid-generation cycle was really not a thing. The PS4 Pro more or less started that. Technically, Nintendo did start this by doing the new 3DS, which was a version of the Nintendo 3DS with some beefier hardware that allowed it to do extra things. There were certain games that only could run on it specifically, and other games that were massively enhanced by it. Eventually, Sony did the PlayStation 4 Pro, which was a much beefier version of the PS4. Now, to their credit, there are no games that run on the PS4 Pro that do not run on the base PS4. However, the PS4 Pro will handle them much better. And the same is true of the Xbox One X. It's substantially more capable hardware over the base model Xbox One. And again, to Microsoft's credit, they didn't make any games that only ran on Xbox One X that did not run on Xbox One. And I'll eat crow on that. I believed legitimately that they were going to get at least some games out there that would only run on the more advanced hardware, and that they would cut out the others, but they didn't do that. To their credit, they deserve credit for that, because Nintendo is guilty of that. They did make games that only ran on their upgraded version. So that leads us back around to this, which is the Switch Pro. Now, the reason for this is relatively obvious. The Switch is, while it is a massive juggernaut of success, it is very anemic hardware compared to its competitors. I mean, the Switch is not even capable of doing what the base model Xbox One is capable of doing, much less the PS4, PS4 Pro, or Xbox One X, and not to mention the upcoming PS5 and Xbox Series X or Xbox. We'll get back to that. So a more advanced, more capable version of the Switch was necessary. Now, the thing is, the Switch it's weird. It's Nintendo being Nintendo. They're off in a corner, basically fighting their own battle. Essentially, Nintendo doesn't really have a home console this generation. What they have, unless you include the Wii U, what they have is a replacement to the 3DS in the form of the Switch that happens to function as a home console if you want it to. But we know that most people are kind of treating it as just a portable device, and they more or less use the dock to charge it, and not so much to actually play on a television. Now, I'm not in that percentage. I play it on a TV, but I'm apparently in the vast minority on that. Now, that said, that has allowed them to get as far as they've gotten with, the games and the success of the sales and everything. It's more or less appealed to the portable market, so people will use it as a complementary device to go along with, hey, I've got an Xbox, or I've got a PS4, or I've got a PC, and I have a Switch. You know what I mean? That there's a lot of people who are doing that, and that's a great thing. But that doesn't mean that the console can last forever doing that model. It's already a lot of games that ran on this generation's hardware. You could water them down substantially and get them to run on the Switch and it could be very technically impressive that you did so, but they can have suffer from all sorts of issues. Take Witcher 3 for example, massive game that ran incredibly nicely with all the capabilities of the Xbox One X, PS4 Pro, and of course the PC. They did get it to run on the Switch, and to their credit, they did it as well as one could possibly do it. They got all the content onto the card, or not really cartridge, but you know what I'm saying. And what they had to do was make sacrifices to textures and make sacrifices to resolution, and it did ultimately work. They got it on there. But that's for people who want to play The Witcher portably, because it runs at something weird like 540p. But it doesn't mean that model is going to work forever, especially when you're getting into the next generation of consoles, where they're going to start taking games from PS5 and trying to get them to run on the Switch. It's going to be borderline impossible. So the idea with an upgraded Switch would be, who knows exactly. The rumors that are out there right now is things that they would allow it to have a bigger cart capacity, and that it would render games in higher resolutions. It would be capable of 4K, but let's be very clear here. It's not 4K rendering of games. It's just 4K output. Now that could probably be limited to streaming apps for videos and things like that. I do not expect any 4K rendered gaming content to be on this thing. I think this is yet just kind of a band-aid to hold the Switch over, and is not going to be for everybody. I doubt Nintendo themselves will care too much about using the additional hardware. It's more to satisfy third-party developers who are going to need it in order to be able to bring certain games over. Now, this does create a situation that is a little different than what happened with PS4 Pro and Xbox One X, which is Nintendo has shown in the past a willingness to make upgraded hardware that is incapable of, where the hardware it's replacing is incapable of playing newer content. Again, I bring up the new 3DS as the example. There were certain games that were made for the new 3DS that did not run on the 3DS. The Switch could be a similar situation, not just because of historical precedent, but also because of the differences of where the games are coming from. To be fair, every game made for Xbox One X or PS4 Pro was ultimately being made for Xbox One or PS4. It's same architecture, it's just upgraded. Where they're bringing the source from now, which would be PS5 and Xbox Series X, is going to be very different architecture. So to bring it over to the Switch might not actually be possible in a lot of instances. Now, again, I'm no engineer, I'm no programmer, but that's my understanding, is that it would be a lot harder to pull the rabbit out of the hat on that one. So we will see how that goes. A Switch Pro would help to alleviate that problem. But the truth is, at some point, if Nintendo wants to stay in that, they're going to have to, release another console. It's just how it's going to have to be. But again, Nintendo's weird, man. They do everything illogical, and they somehow work out. Somehow it ends up being successful for them. And when they try to do logical things, it doesn't work out. So you just kind of have to let Nintendo be Nintendo and hope for the best for them. That's about all you can do. But we'll probably talk more about this when we get to the Nintendo Switch birthday situation. But I'm of the philosophy now, and I'm more bold about it, that the Nintendo Switch is most certainly not a 9th generation video game console. It is an 8th generation video game console. That means that Nintendo had two in the same generation. Both the Wii U and the Switch are in the same generation. I'll make that case more strongly in that video, but I certainly don't decide what the generations borders are. I will say this. Generations are typically defined by one part timing and one part technology. Technologically speaking, the Switch fails to meet the definition of a new generation. It is anemic to the base Xbox One, which was indisputably an 8th generation console. So it doesn't even surpass stuff in that generation, much less lead into a new one. Timing wise, it also came out at this point like 3 years ago. So that's while short time, is almost enough time to be considered it's a single generation by certain definitions. So it certainly can't be considered the launching pad if it came out at the point it came out versus the point in which the PS5 and Xbox Series X come out. There will have been over 3 years. That is enough of a gap to definitely be a different generation. It just is. So we will see. Like the N64 came out in 96. The Dreamcast came out in 98 in Japan. and that's only 2 years. You know what I mean? So it's like, and I think the N64 might technically have come out in 95 in Japan, like really late 95. But even then, you're talking about 95 to 98. That's 3 years, and it's 2 different generations. So I'm very strongly in the camp of the Nintendo Switch is an 8th generation console, and the Nintendo Switch Pro, whatever it is, we don't know the details of it. I would bet you it'll probably be on par with, slightly above a base PS4, maybe just under PS4 Pro, somewhere in that range. I don't think they're going to go beyond that. And if that's the case, then that doesn't do well for the technological argument either. For you to have that case, it would have to have been more capable on an Xbox One X, and I can't imagine that it will be. And even then you get in the weird situation where one version of their hardware was one generation and a different version was a different generation, which at that point is just 2 different consoles. So it doesn't matter. Point is, we presumably have an upgraded Switch to look forward to at some point, as early as possibly this summer. So that would make some sense marketing wise. They would want to kind of get that out there before their impending competition starts to hit the market, which I still maintain will be November this year. I'm thinking November 13th and November 20th of this year for both the Xbox and PS5. You know, one will launch one week and one will launch the other week. That's my guess. But anyway, so that's that for that. And moving on to the next subject. We kind of talked about it. The Xbox Series X. Now this is not new news. Like, we got a big information dump about this not too long ago about what the console would look like, and it's a strange looking machine. It looks a lot like the PCFX, which a lot of people joked about that. I just did a video on the PCFX, and a lot of people were talking about like, oh look, it's the early version of the Xbox Series X, and it's like, yeah, it kind of is, aesthetically speaking. It's about the same length as an Xbox One X, but it's much taller. And it's meant to look more like a PC tower. It's a strange design, which, whatever, I don't really care too much about that. It'll be kind of an odd thing to figure out where to place it. We don't know enough on the details of backwards compatibility. You know, like, we presume that it plays all Xbox One games, and we're thinking it probably plays all the stuff they made compatible with the 360 and the OG Xbox, but I doubt it has like perfect compatibility or anything like that. That's just my guess. So you can probably use it to replace your existing Xbox One, but if you still have a bunch of 360 or OG Xbox games that you want to play that aren't compatible, you'll probably still need those out there. That's, again, a guess. But the other thing that's really weird about it is the name. Microsoft has a history of giving stuff really bad names. I mean, a lot of stuff with Windows and how their numbers are always changing and whatever, how they don't follow any logical sequence. They went from years to like lettering to words to back to numbers, but then they were sequential numbers, and then they skipped a number. There's no Windows 9, etc. You know, like, they just did they do a lot of strange stuff. Xbox, no exception to that. The original Xbox had a perfectly acceptable name. It was the first time out of the gate. The name Xbox derived from the fact that it was based on DirectX, and it was called short for the DirectX box. Xbox 360, they didn't want to call it Xbox 2 because they didn't want it to just follow the Sony logic of just PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3. So they tried to get kind of weird with it. Xbox 360, the name, you just accept it. I don't know if it ever really grew on me. I just accepted it. The same with Xbox One, which is a terrible name, but again, you just accept it. So now they're doing Xbox Series X, but as dumb as that name was, it turns out that's actually not the name of it. What they were saying was that it's a series of consoles, and this is the first in that series of consoles, which means there's different iterations. But the console itself is actually called Xbox. And it's like, you did that. You did that the first time, and I feel like we're just repeating the same joke from 2013 when we first heard the name Xbox One, and we were like, there was an Xbox One, that was the original, and then it gets even worse by saying, no, this is just Xbox, which there already was a just Xbox. I don't even know. Like, I don't know. They've never figured out that naming sequence, and obviously they're never going to. They're trying to treat Xbox as a brand, which is fine. But I wish they showed a little more respect to the actual machine and what its name individually is. But that's just the old school console gamer in me that just likes stuff to have, like, you know, identifiable names that everyone's like, oh, that's what that was. Oh, that's what that was. As opposed to having to be like, I'm talking about this one. No, not that one. This one. I don't like to have to do that. But whatever. So I'm looking forward to the console itself. But already we have our just strangeness. And moving on to the next subject. Sony did a very similar thing where they had a conference talking about PlayStation 5, and to nobody's surprise, oh, good, it's called the PlayStation 5. But this time what they did was they actually did the logo reveal, which the internet's making fun of the logo reveal because it's like, oh, look, it says PS5. Couldn't have predicted that. It's the exact same font as the PS4, and then like the latter half of the PS3 when they upgraded from that like Spider-Man font to eventually using the current font. They're just keeping that, and then they're just changing it from a 4 to a 5. That's fine. I have no problem with that, with the brand consistency and all that stuff. It's just kind of hilarious that it was meant to be like this big reveal, and it's like, I think every one of us predicted it would look exactly like that. So just kind of funny. Beyond that, there's really not much else to say about them at this point in time that I haven't already said. Like I said, I think it's coming out in late November, either the 13th or the 20th. I have less to gripe about with the PS5's name. I mean, I've just kind of accepted at this point that they just use the same word and then add a different number to it every time. At least they're sequential. And at this point, at the time I record this, we still don't know exactly what the console is going to look like. We've seen a bunch of those like rumored dev kits and all that stuff, but we don't actually know. So looking forward to finding out what that's like. But it seems like this generation, assuming the dev kit leaks, if you will, are real. And it's very possible they're not, because, I mean, dev kits, there's a lot of dev kits out there that look absolutely nothing like the final version of the console. So it wouldn't surprise me if, it's a completely different thing. But assuming it does actually look like that, then it's kind of cool that we have a generation, we have these two consoles that just don't look like traditional game consoles. I actually kind of like that. But, that's just I guess the historian in me that just likes all the strange models that have come out over the years. But how it actually stacks up, performs, all that stuff, don't know yet, and we'll find out eventually. So moving on. This is a subject that was just kind of totally random. And it's more about me and just something that's kind of cool. So I want to give a shout out to a guy named Juan right now, and I want to thank him. So I did an episode of Playload not too long ago, where I was talking about how I had picked up a copy of Shovel Knight Treasure Trove. And I said it was one of the last vestiges of my Best Buy Gamers Club Unlocked membership. Now, Best Buy Gamers Club Unlocked was a program that Best Buy ran where basically you could sign up for this thing called Gamers Club Unlocked. It was $30 and gave you 2 years of coverage. And what you would get for that coverage is that you would get 20% off of the price of any video game. You could do it online. You could buy stuff in stores. It didn't matter if it was with the exception of a couple of blackout dates like Black Friday, which didn't originally work that way, but later they changed it. You got 20% off of the price, whatever it is. So if a game came out, it was $60, brand new, day one. You're walking in there, you scan your little card, and all of a sudden the game's only $48. You're getting 20% off right away. It was great. Now, it's not a surprise why they stopped doing it. They were hemorrhaging money from it because it was actually costing them more money to sell the games than they were making. Their logic at the time was, hey man, if someone comes into the store to buy, that game, they came in. So now we can get them theoretically to buy something else because they're already there. Give away the razor to sell the blades. Where they screwed up was they allowed it to work online. So if I just wanted, whatever game, I just went to their website, clicked on that, just got that, and, stopped buying stuff. Because there was no other incentive. You still got the free shipping and all that. So there was really no reason to do that. So whatever, they decided to get rid of that program. But they honored the contracts that had been signed already. So everybody who was already signed up, when their membership ran out, they would have no option to renew, but they would still be fulfilled. Now, I found out at one point through someone on Twitter that it turns out that Gamers Club Unlocked was stackable. So you could have bought like 6 memberships at one time, and that would have just gone, for 12 years or whatever it would be. Now, I don't know anybody who did that, but Juan is an example of someone who actually did buy multiple memberships at once for whatever reason, and his doesn't expire until like 2022. And so he's like, yeah, man, I'm just going to give you access to it. So now, even, I have access to a Gamers Club Unlocked membership it's going to be valid for another 2 years, which would be pretty cool. It wouldn't get me the reward zone points or any of that stuff. That would still be hooked up for him, and good for him. But it'll be cool to be able to still go in and buy stuff, because, that'll be useful for, like, PS5 and Xbox Series X games. I hate saying that. But it'll be useful for that too. So that's kind of a cool thing. So I just want to say thanks to Juan for making that possible whenever I get to finally use it. Now, moving on. This was just kind of a random subject that I kind of got inspired by. A buddy of mine messaged me out of nowhere, and he just showed me a Wii U kiosk. And he's like, yo, man, this is a Wii U kiosk. It's in your neighborhood. You could go buy it and pick it up and have it. And it wasn't even that expensive. I do want a full Wii U set. At this point in time, I'm only like 2 games away. I don't really have a great desire to own a Wii U kiosk. But it would be kind of cool. The price on it wasn't even that bad either. It was perfectly acceptable for what it is. And I just sat there thinking, like, financially speaking, getting this thing isn't really a problem. And I do kind of want it. But the problem with it just comes down to space. Like, where does one put something like this? And it got me kind of thinking about how that's kind of an interesting subject. A lot of the times if we choose not to buy something as collectors, it's generally because the price isn't good on it, the condition isn't good on it, etc. Or we just don't want that particular thing. But have you ever been in a situation where the price was good, condition was good, and you wanted it, and the only reason you didn't take it was the logistics? Is it just too big? Is it too bulky? Would the wife or the girlfriend or whatever give you shit about it? Like one of those type of situations. And I just thought it was kind of a fascinating thing to think about, because I can't recall the last time I was specifically in that situation. Not that this thing is the best example ever, because it wasn't something I was dying to have, but I sit there and I think, like, one thing I always wanted was like a European style Dreamcast kiosk. There's actually a Shenmue one specifically. I've seen it online before, but certainly it was only available in the UK. Certainly is not something I would have immediate access to. But let's just say, hypothetically speaking, that one showed up on eBay, and it was, for some reason, it was in Chicago. Dude's like, local pickup, come get it. It's $100, which is a ridiculously good price for something like that. Would I have to take it, or would I have to turn it down? And I think about it, I'm like, the price is amazing. It's something I totally want. Condition, let's presume the condition is fine. But what do I do with it? Like, how do I physically get it? Where do I put it? I think I would have to turn it down on that basis. And that's one of those moments of like, oh shit, I'm an adult now. But it's getting to a point as a collector where I like to collect stuff that's smaller rather than the bigger, bulkier items. Typically, just logically so, just for space. And then I started joking with my buddy about how we should, just buy like a separate apartment or something, or he should, because he has a real job, and he should buy like a separate apartment. We just put all our stuff in it, and it's just like, oh, cool. This is the mutual apartment that's just full of video games. But obviously, not really going to do that. But it was, it's just kind of a funny thing to think about. Like, you get to that point where you can't really keep amassing that much stuff, and if you do, it has to be smaller things. Now, in the case of, let's pretend for a second that scenario occurred. I really did get this random, that Shenmue kiosk from the UK, for some reason is here in Chicago in great condition, more or less they're giving it away. What do I do? I don't know. I would have to really think about like how I would even deal with that. Like, do I, store it in a friend's house? Like, how do I pull that rabbit out of that hat? Or do I just sit there and think logically, like, what is the point of this? I don't have a place to put it, so I don't really feel like I should be the one who has it, Just kind of an interesting food for thought. And I was just more or less curious, like, how many of you has that happened to? Where you wanted something, it was a good price, you could afford it, it was all ready to go, it was just simple logistics. You can't physically get it to where you would want it, or you don't have a place for it to exist. And, it's the same thing happened with me with the context of being, outside of video games. Like, something you guys may or may not know about me, I'm a big fan of the DeLorean, the infamous car from the 80s. I've never owned one. I've sat in one like a couple of times ever. I've rode in one once. But it's always been like, even though I know it's a junk car, it's always been like the car I wanted, like as a child. I was like, that's the car I want just to have. Like, it's a cool thing. Not that I'm saying I could afford to get one, because realistically I couldn't, but let's pretend for a second I could. There was a good deal on it, whatever. It's a car, like, what am I going to do with it? Where am I going to put it? Like, it's not a car I would actually drive. It wouldn't replace my current car. It would have to just go and be parked somewhere. So then you're just dealing with a logistical problem. And I'm just curious, like, how many of you have a video game-like thing like that, that you have to take care of? Because eventually collections are kind of like that. They're just things you have to maintain. You have to dust them, and you have to keep them out of, light and all that sort of stuff. And it becomes more like a curated museum that you're taking care of, as opposed to like a hobby that you're playing, and so on and so forth. And I was just curious, like, again, if you guys have any specific examples of things you had to turn down for that reason. Just curious. Anyway, that'll do it for that. So next up, I want to talk about just some shout-outs here. These are shout-outs to Patreon backers. The following people have all supported my Patreon. I think like all these guys have been here for a really long time, actually. So once again, I really appreciate that. Because it helps keep things going. These guys all are at the appropriate tier in which they get a shout out. Now you do have various options if you want to help out the channel with Patreon. There's higher tiers where you can be on this podcast. You can pick subjects for this podcast. If you're on this podcast, you actually get to pick all the subjects. You can get a shout out like they're about to, or you can just get early access to videos. Whatever you want to do is appreciated. Or if you just want to contribute just an amount just to contribute, that's up to you as well. But so these people, thank you very much. It's Trey Wagner, Luis Bonilla, Michael Kelly, Jesse Perez, Joseph Tamburino, Eric Perales, and Caleb Bravo. Once again, that's Trey Wagner, Luis Bonilla, Michael Kelly, Jesse Perez, Joseph Tamburino, Eric Perales, and Caleb Bravo. Thank you again, guys. You are awesome. Now we're going to move on. This half of the podcast is going to have less to do with video games and more so to do with general nerd entertainment. The first and foremost thing that I wanted to talk about is it goes back to the Fox era Marvel movies, namely the Fantastic Four and X-Men when they had that, before Fox was absorbed by Disney. Now, I talked a lot about that merger and all that stuff as it was happening and what I thought some of the ramifications would be. We've had a new slight update to this, which is now that Fox is wholly owned by Disney, or at least the entertainment division is, aka the sports and news division are not. They inherited more or less a problem, which was that Fox had 2 Marvel movies basically shot and in the can by the time that they were absorbed. That was X-Men Dark Phoenix and X-Men New Mutants. Now, X-Men Dark Phoenix, they did eventually allow out. And the reason Disney didn't really want them out is they didn't want to dilute the brand anymore. Now that they were going to have the characters back, they wanted to roll them into the MCU, but they wanted to reboot them. They didn't want to use the Fox versions with Hugh Jackman and all that stuff. So releasing those movies just meant you were going to, have to wait even longer to refresh them into the MCU. But they also acknowledge, hey, this is basically free money to put these out there. We should probably just do this and wrap this up. And so they put out Dark Phoenix, which I guess they removed certain things. I think that they, at least from the title, they got rid of the title X-Men. They just called it Dark Phoenix, and they just kind of chucked it in theaters and said, like, whatever this recoups, fine, who cares. It wasn't a very good movie in the end. It was actually probably one of the worst X-Men movies ever produced. Not the worst. That would still be X-Men Origins Wolverine. But it's really bad. The other one they had was New Mutants, or at the time X-Men New Mutants. Now, as I understand it, this one was a nightmare to work with. Fox basically originally greenlit it as a horror film using the X-Men IP, trying to come up with some sort of creative way to reinvigorate the brand, because at that point the brand was already back to being destroyed. Like Days of Future Past resurrected it, and then they kind of quickly started tanking it again with Apocalypse and all this stuff. Fox greenlit this strange adaptation that was meant to be a horror movie, and while it took place in that universe, as far as I know, it didn't have any of the traditional characters in it. They actually released a trailer for it a few years ago when it was still going to be a Fox production that was just going to come out. But after the Disney acquisition was starting to happen, one of Disney's conditions was like, don't release that. We don't want that out there. And so Fox started changing it up. There was a whole bunch of reshoots. Like, the whole production of this film was like a complete nightmare. And they got to a point now where they finally decided to restore the original version under the director's vision, because I guess he was really unhappy with all the changes that Fox was making. And Disney's going to put it out there. And it's just going to be called New Mutants. Now, they're keeping the name X-Men off of it, probably intentionally so, to not do brand confusion. But also, there was some rumors of like what they were trying to do with it. Like, possibly they could have used it as a launching pad to bring the X-Men into the MCU. Like, there was all sorts of stories out there about what they were trying to do with this movie. And in the end, while the movie is not out yet, it would appear that they've just decided, okay, this is just going to be this weird one-off New Mutants movie, they'll probably drop a lot of the actual X-Men references in general, and it'll just be this kind of horror thing that they just throw out there, they let it exist, and then they move on, and it will not be considered canon, and hopefully doesn't confuse the mass audiences. Maybe it'll even be a halfway decent movie, who really knows? But it's just kind of cool to finally see that will actually come into existence. The director of the film, who was publicly being like, yo, what Fox turned this into is not my movie, is now back on the team of like, yeah, Disney let me make my movie, and it's back to being what it was. Now, that could actually be true, or it could be a thing where he's been detached from the movie for a few years now, so he kind of doesn't really care, and he's just like, look, let me get in good with Disney because that could mean more work. You don't really know. I'm not trying to say that he's just doing that, but at the same time, who's to say it isn't? Maybe this is what was required to get the film out at all. And maybe they'll allow him to do future projects down the road. It's hard to say. But either way, there is some version of New Mutants finally coming out, and that will be the last remnant of the Fox era Marvel movies that actually comes out, at least under their production. That doesn't speak of Deadpool, we now know there is going to be yet another Deadpool movie, which I actually thought should be called Deadpool 3-boot, because that will be the third time that Ryan Reynolds has played Deadpool in a new universe of events. The first one, he played it in X-Men Origins Wolverine, which was garbage, and they make fun of it, and it was wiped out of continuity anyway. And then he played him in the actual Deadpool movie. And then he, of course, did Deadpool 2, which was still that same continuity. But now that you're rolling Deadpool over to the MCU, he's being rolled into a new continuity. Uniquely, he is a character that you could actually do that with because he's like aware of the fact that his reality is a comic book. So you can throw him around and have that be a joke. But that gives you the perfect opportunity to have a brand new title like, Deadpool 3-boot, where he's just constantly making fun of the fact that he's just being chucked around from universe to universe. I think that would be a cool thing to do. I don't know what they ended up actually doing, of course, but that's going to be a thing. So that doesn't exactly count because that film will have been a Disney production from beginning to end, even though that character is from the old Fox era. But the last one to be part of the actual production house of Fox, as it once was, will be New Mutants. And hopefully it's a better send-off than Dark Phoenix was, because that was a travesty. Moving on. Something is coming out that I did not realize was really, at the time I record this, only like a week away, and it says a lot, which is the new Star Trek Picard series. I want to say this. I did not grow up with Star Trek. It was just a series I never really caught until I was in college. I ended up watching, at that point in time, every episode of Star Trek from every series. The original, the animated, TNG, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Enterprise. And I really enjoyed it. Like, I was like, wow, I really wish I had watched this when I was younger because I really missed out. This was an incredible series. I watched all the movies, etc. And by the time I caught it, it was considered a dead franchise. At that point, Enterprise had already been canceled and the show and everything was done. Then J.J. Abrams came along and did the 2009 Star Trek, which my reaction at the time was, this was a fun movie, but it wiped out everything from continuity. And I didn't really like that. I found that kind of insulting, but at the same time, I recognized that it was something that kind of needed to happen because the continuity was so convoluted that it was like, what were you going to do? Unfortunately, I now know more about the behind the scenes of it and why that was more of a licensing thing than it was actually storytelling thing, which is whatever. But it had a terrible follow-up in Into Darkness, and eventually you got Star Trek Beyond, which was actually not bad. It was pretty good. It just bombed like crazy. So, and we now know that as the Kelvin timeline, which no longer exists. They're not making a fourth one. That project is completely dead. And meanwhile, from that spin-off license, they made Star Trek Discovery, which I have not watched and I don't intend to. I've heard nothing but horrible things from other Star Trek fans. Again, for same reasons. It's you can tell it's done through licensing agreements as opposed to being done for the purposes of competent storytelling within the Star Trek established canon. And then when it came to Star Trek Picard, this truly depresses me because Jean-Luc Picard is one of my favorite characters in the history of fiction. And that says a lot because I wasn't introduced to him until I was like 20 years old. And I was already like, dude, this guy is incredible. You know, I bought an action figure of him and I just left him up like, you know, in my place as just like a statuette of like, dude, this dude's a boss. So I completely and totally understood from a marketing standpoint when they announced the Star Trek Picard series. I got it, and they were like, "Oh yeah, Patrick Stewart, who's, you know, Patrick Stewart's an awesome actor, but he's definitely in a phase of his career where he's like, I'll take whatever, not because he needs it, but because he's just having fun with it." And so I have no ill will towards him on taking this project. Man, I don't even give him crap for being in the Emoji Movie. You know, like he's just having fun with it. He's just doing his thing, and I'm cool with that. But you could see through the promotional materials, that whole show was designed to be, hey, we're not going to tell a competent, logical follow-up to Next Generation, which technically you couldn't because it would have to fit inside of Next Generation. But we're not going to do that. What instead we're going to do is we're going to just say we have that actor and he's playing that character. Damned his continuity. Don't you just want to see what happened after? Why don't you see what happened after? You know, we'll resurrect essentially a dead character and just give him some new adventure. I really hate that. I hate this nostalgia berry shit. I hate that we keep doing this, and I'll get back to it because we're going to talk about Star Wars Rise of Skywalker in a little bit here. But man, while I have not watched this show, obviously, because at the time I record this, it's not out. I think that Star Trek, I think this alternative license crap from the Kelvin timeline and everything Bad Robot has done has really, really damaged Star Trek. And it's funny because they're the same guys who ended up completely damaging Star Wars, but they're a little less guilty in Star Wars' case, but we'll get back to that. But all I can say is I really wanted them not to do this show. I would really like, I mean, Star Trek, after Beyond, you had a chance to be like, look, you just made a competent Star Trek movie in this timeline. It was good. It even kind of functioned as its own finality if you really wanted it to be. You now have some faith in the core fan base again. And even though it bombed, the story was competent and felt like Star Trek. You now can go back to the well. You've kind of reinvigorated the brand a bit. You can do a fresh show that fits within continuity and actually makes sense. They didn't do that, though, because they didn't have licensing conditions to be able to do it. It's a whole long story between CBS and Paramount, and now it doesn't matter. The companies have merged again, so licensing is no longer a problem. They're just kind of riding out the old deals. So I don't think Star Trek Discovery will continue, nor do I think Picard will continue beyond this. So I'm actually going to have to accept, unless Star Trek Picard somehow stuns me and is actually amazing, I'm going to have to live in a world where I have to choose my continuity with Star Trek. And what I'm most likely going to do is say, look, everything Bad Robot did doesn't count. Everything that's prior to the 09's, to Star Trek is real, and everything from that point onward is not. And what's annoying about it is, at least the J.J. Abrams movies, the Kelvin movies, they explain that they split into a different continuity, and they show that process. What happens with Discovery is it can't say that it's in the original continuity, but it says without saying it that it is in the original continuity. And the problem with that is it doesn't honor the rules of the original continuity, and therefore just creates all sorts of issues, which is why people find it insulting. And they only did it that way because they had no choice, because they were trying to appeal to, hey, look, if it's in the original continuity, people will like it and they'll buy the merch. Yeah, but we can't do that because we don't own the rights to those characters. We don't own the rights to those looks, etc. Yeah, it doesn't matter. Just do it anyway. Just say it's there, and their outfits are completely different because they just are. That's like executive speak. It's not creative speak. And that results in problems like that. And it's sad because we live in a point where all these big franchises became big because you had competent storytellers who very passionately cared about their stories and how they were told and what it was presented like, what it looked like, and the continuity of it, having it all be consistent and make sense. Eventually what happens to these properties is they fall into the hands of people who had nothing to do with that process. They see it solely as, whoa, that thing's successful. If I put Star Trek on it or I put Star Wars on it, it will make a bunch of money for me. So who really cares about how it does that? I'll just put Star Wars on this and it'll be successful. I'll put Star Trek on that and it will be successful. Who cares if it damns the previous stories? I never even watched that crap. You know what I mean? There's a guy named Les Moonves who used to be in control of Star Trek. He's the dude who axed Star Trek Enterprise, and he was kind of the guy who kept it away for multiple years. But he was one of the dudes running the entirety of I think it was CBS at the time. And despite being the guy running it, when Force Awakens came out, he actually thought that Star Wars was Star Trek, and he thought that they had this big giant hit on their hands because he legit did not know they were two different franchises. This dude had the keys to the kingdom. And unfortunately, it's the same type of thing that ultimately happened with Star Wars. So let's switch into that now. So new subject, Star Wars, The Rise of Skywalker. Now, look, this is going to be spoiler-ridden, I'm sure. So if you haven't seen the movie and you still care about that sort of thing, this is where you tune out. But I have a lot to say on Star Wars Rise of Skywalker, and like to the point where I was actually considering doing a live stream of this. There was a time where, under the Disney era, after each Star Wars movie came out, I came home, I turned on my computer, I opened up YouTube, and I did a live stream just wanting to talk about it. I did that with Force Awakens. I did that with Rogue One. I even did that with Last Jedi. I didn't do that with Solo because I just came away from it so indifferent. I just didn't care. I think I talked about it in a podcast once, and I just didn't have any reaction beyond that. And this one, it's like you walk away from it just, I can't even help but laugh. Like it's like, I can't believe you massacred it so badly. And look, I know the popular thing is to hate Star Wars. You can tell they're Star Wars fans because they hate Star Wars, right? Look, every Star Wars movie has issues, some more than others. There's obviously, the original trilogy, we all look at it like it's this flawless thing. There are issues in those movies. And as I grow older, I become more accepting of that, particularly Return of the Jedi, where I love Return of the Jedi, but it definitely has major flaws. And I see some of the arguments that people are making. They're like, if Return of the Jedi came out today, everyone would be bitching about, wait, so they're brother and sister now? Wait a minute, so like the Empire is just defeated by a couple of teddy bears? Oh, okay, so he can just do Force lightning. I guess that's a thing now. So we kind of treat it like, oh no, it's fine because it was in the OG trilogy, so it's fine. Whereas now it's like they introduce anything new and we just complain about it. I get that counter argument, but where I'll go with this is, you can shit on the prequels all you want, but there are competent things in there, and they at least had one cohesive vision. Even if the vision was arguably stupid, it was cohesive. The point of it was, I'm going to make this trilogy that's about turning this kid into the Dark Lord of the Sith, and how the Republic fell and became basically a fascist dictatorship. Like, how did those things occur was the goal of that trilogy. I defy you to sit here and tell me what the goal of the Disney trilogy was, aside from print money. You can't. Because the story didn't have a cohesive goal. Now let's get into the history of this, because I hear the keyboards in the distance being like, yeah, but wait, there was a thing. So hang on. A little bit of production background with the new trilogy. When Disney took it over, they inherited George Lucas's outlines for the next trilogy. Basically, when George was getting ready to sell, the company would be valued higher if there was some state of new Star Wars movies in production. So George more or less went around telling the primary actors at the time, Mark Hamill, Carrie Fisher, Harrison Ford, like, hey, I'm going to do an episode 7. I want to sign you guys on. And he did that with just kind of sight unseen. Like, we're going to do this thing. I'm going to make it happen. So that elevated the value of the company because he already had the actors signed on. And they were some state of production. So then he was able to, more or less dump it into Disney's hands at $4.05 billion, just a touch higher than Marvel was sold for, which was intentional. Now, while people look at it like, wow, George is like super selfish, he actually mostly did it because he was trying to keep his people employed. ILM was running out of projects. They were getting outbid by Weta for visual effects by major studios. So a big part of it was, you have to, from now on, Disney projects all have to use my people You have to keep them working on your movies. And that's why Disney uses ILM and Skywalker Sound and THX, etc., because they were required to contractually. That was actually the biggest part of it. It was kind of a nice move. He also became the single greatest stock owner of Disney in one go, which is good for him. But he was supposed to have a measure of involvement still in the series, but he would no longer be like the unified controller of the franchise. But I think he felt that he would have some level of control. But he also wanted to, hedge his bets a little. So he made possibly the greatest mistake he ever made. And it wasn't his fault. I mean, it was and it wasn't. He believed that if he put the right person in charge of Lucasfilm right before he signed, the sale, that he would have a person in place who would honor his vision. And he put Kathleen Kennedy in charge. Now, Kathleen Kennedy did not come out of nowhere. She is a producer who's been working in the Hollywood system for a long time. She's actually worked on a lot of your favorite films, the Indiana Jones movies, Back to the Future, Jurassic Park. She's done a lot of stuff, but her level of involvement in all those films was probably very minor. Her name just happened to be attached to a lot of them. And what she did is anybody's best guess. For all we know, she just got everybody their coffee, but she was always labeled some sort of producer. Now, what we do know about her is she was a good people person. She was good at communicating with people, leveling with them with bad news, that sort of stuff. But she wasn't necessarily a creative outlet. Now, I think George felt that she would just be a good people person in charge of honoring his vision and just let the creatives do what they were supposed to do while she just more or less facilitated. But once she had that power and once she was signed under Disney, Bob Iger, the CEO of Disney, mandated that Star Wars Episode 7, as we now know it, The Force Awakens, be safe, which was not what George wanted. George wanted a completely different story that started leading to a new outcome. But Bob Iger kind of went in that Les Moonves direction where he knew what Star Wars was. He had just bought it. He understood what the franchise was. But he didn't understand the story or what the goal was. He just said, look, nobody likes the prequels and we have kind of a damaged brand we just inherited. We need to rejuvenate it, so we need to do it the safest way we can. What do they like? Everybody likes A New Hope. Why don't we just, make that movie feels like Star Wars, so give them that movie. So that's why they gave us A New Hope again. It was more or less a mandate. J.J. Abrams was the perfect guy to facilitate that role because he had literally done that with Star Trek. He facilitated the role that was requested of him to reinvigorate while rebooting Star Trek. He did a soft reboot of Star Wars. Now, I've talked up and down about Force Awakens and my thoughts on it, and I can conclude once again, I'll just try to sum this up. It did not age well. It became A New Hope immediately with both Jedi and Empire's Greatest Hits kind of thrown in, and as a result is not a particularly good movie, made vastly more incompetent by the sequels. But when you sit at it, and just look at the first one by itself, Force Awakens, I have 3 major issues with it. Like, I didn't like the story overall. It's certainly not the Episode 7 that I would have wanted to create, but let's just pretend for argument's sake that's the movie I have to work with, but I can make a couple of changes. What am I going to change? First and foremost, I don't actually blame them for this, and I've said this years ago, and I'll still say it again. I don't blame them for this because I know they tried to do this, but it didn't work out. The opening scene, you have Poe Dameron getting information from Max von Sydow about like this piece of a map to Luke Skywalker and all that stuff. I hate that whole plot line of like, we have to find Luke, whatever, fine. But again, the agreement here is I have to work with that storyline. The change I make is I get rid of Max von Sydow. Perfectly good actor. He's fine. But he doesn't make any sense there because that whole scene is presented like, hey, do you remember this guy? Remember this character? He's important. Blah, 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 blah. But he's not, because we've never seen Max von Sydow in any other Star Wars movie before. He doesn't mean anything to us. What you should have done was have, I want to say Dennis Larson. He's the guy who played Wedge Antilles in the original trilogy. He should have been the guy who played this role. Now watch the movie in your head with him in the role. Immediately we recognize him as Wedge Antilles. He has a direct connection to both Luke and Leia, so it's like obvious why he would have this thing, why he would know who Luke was, why he would refer to General, to me, she's royalty. Like, that makes sense. Like, it all fits together. And then you introduce Kylo Ren, the new big bad guy. And what does he do? He kills Wedge Antilles, this guy who was like our boy for 3 movies. We just see him die. So now we instantly hate Kylo when we get he's the bad guy. That is a vastly more powerful intro. However, I do not fault the film itself for this, because I know from behind the scenes they actually did try to do this, and Dennis Larson was not interested in the film. Ironically, he did end up in The Rise of Skywalker in one shot, in the same character. That's such a missed opportunity. It's unbelievable. But fine, whatever. You have to let that go. The next one is the state of the galaxy. Now, I know they definitely wanted to avoid this one because they didn't like how the prequels were so like politically dialogue driven and here's how everything works. That was too much. But the original trilogy, while it didn't offer you a ton of that, it gave you enough of the basics to follow what it was. It's like, okay, there's an empire, there's a resistance, or a rebel alliance, and there's an emperor who is in control. He just wiped out. There's like a single line of dialogue in A New Hope that covers it all. Basically says like, how will the Senate how will the Emperor maintain control without the bureaucracy? And he's like, no, we've just wiped away the last remnants of the old Republic. We're now using the Death Star as like our #1 like police state type of thing. And then you just kind of find out that there's this ultimate emperor who controls everything because he just inherited power over the course of time. It's a new universe at the time it comes into existence in A New Hope, so you're cool with it. The problem with Force Awakens is it's not a new universe. It takes place 30 years after Return of the Jedi. We all know what happened before this, but we don't understand is how we got from that point to this point, and how it feels like nothing really changed. Because you're like, oh, cool, we don't have the Empire, but we have this thing called the First Order. Okay, where did they come from? What's their deal? We don't have a Rebel Alliance, but now we have the Resistance. Well, what the hell is that? Why did they change their name? And we have a New Republic, I guess, but we don't know anything about them, what their deal is at all. And they get destroyed in the movie before you learn anything. So essentially, they're just trying to reset it up to the same position it was at A New Hope, but they do a horrible job of explaining how we got to that point. The First Order should be the tattered remnants of the Empire, yet they seem vastly more capable than them. The Resistance, I just hate that they just did that just to change the word Rebel Alliance to the Resistance for no apparent reason. What they do is in the books and stuff, they're like, oh, well, actually, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, no, I'm sorry, but the film itself needed to address that. That was a huge fail. But fine. But the worst moment of all, the one that to me, in hindsight, is what truly broke Star Wars forever. And it wasn't Jar Jar Binks. It wasn't, it's sand, it's rough, it's coarse, it gets everywhere. It wasn't any of that. The moment that broke Star Wars for me totally beyond repair, and I recognize this more and more as time has gone on, is Starkiller Base. They really did Death Star 3.0. Now, in the first movie, that made sense. It was the big baddie thing. And in fact, the fun fact about that was the Death Star wasn't actually supposed to be destroyed in A New Hope. It was supposed to be this trilogy where they eventually destroy it at the end, which is why they recycled that idea for Return of the Jedi. But they ended up using it in A New Hope because it seemed like such a powerful ending, and George was like, I'll come up with something else later. Now, unfortunately, he kind of didn't, which is part of why Return of the Jedi is a little weird. But at least with Return of the Jedi, I kind of accepted it because it was the Empire saying, no, we're still here, and we're bigger and badder than ever. We fixed this flaw that eventually we found out Galen Erso created, whatever. But we did that, and we're going to use this as a trap to finally eliminate the Rebel Alliance, which is a wonky idea, but whatever, we accept it. What I don't accept is Starkiller Base. You have the tattered remnants of the Empire who's somehow vastly more capable of them. They hollow out a bigger planet, and you even have like this idiotic scene of all like the characters sitting around being like, I wish it was like the Death Star, sir. This is the Death Star, and this is Starkiller Base. Look how much bigger and crazier it is. And you just go like, oh my god, this is for idiots. This is for like really stupid people. That's what this scene is. This is for people who watched Star Wars once like 30 years ago and vaguely remember it. This movie was not meant for Star Wars fans. This was not meant for people who passionately care about the franchise and those type of details. This is just meant to the casual audience who vaguely remembers it. And I don't know why in the world you would cater to that. I'm not saying you can't make it something that they can relate to and appeal to. Of course, that's where the money is. I get that. But man, does it become insulting. And then it eventually crashes on itself, which it ultimately did, because your actual hardcore fan base just goes, you just pissed in my water there, man. Like, I don't care anymore. So fine, if you're telling me I have to accept Starkiller Base, fine. But where it truly, ultimately fails in all regard is that they actually successfully blow it up. You know, when I'm watching that the first time and I'm kind of rolling my eyes that they have a new Death Star, and I'm rolling my eyes that even in the movie, the Resistance fighters are just like Harrison Ford, Solo's just like, how do we blow it up? There's always a way to blow it up. Like, like it's become boring to them how many times they've done this. You see the characters go through it. And I'm sitting there like thinking like the only way this works is if the Resistance, if you will, is so confident that they're going to destroy it because we've always done that before, and then they fail. They try to destroy Starkiller Base and they can't do it. They fail. You have this powerful scene where Han Solo is killed by Kylo Ren, which actually was probably the only really functional scene in that whole sequence. That actually was good. It connected directly. It made sense. That was actually good. But if you also had them fail to destroy Starkiller Base, then awesome! You can use George's original idea of this thing sticking around for the entire trilogy and being some sort of looming threat. And we can see where that actually would go. Because in the originals, the Empire had one that they barely got to use. And the second one, they never even got to try, really, other than destroying a couple of ships with it. What would be the state of a galaxy where that actually was an imposing threat that constantly stuck around? We never got to see it because, oh good, they blew it up again. I remember seeing that the first time in theaters, and it was just crickets. Like, as soon as it blew up, there was nobody being like, yeah! It was like, wow, you did the most basic vanilla possible outcome. That sucked. Yeah. And here's the other thing. I know people like talk about Rey and how she's a Mary Sue and all that stuff. I actually gave her a pass on that in the first movie because I thought they were going somewhere with it. In Force Awakens, she's way too good at everything. Okay, she is a Mary Sue. I'm sorry, she just is. And I actually would have accepted this because I thought and I hoped they were going somewhere very oddly unique with it, which they never did. And I'll just tell you what I thought they were going to do, which was I didn't think she was going to be nobody who was just really talented. I didn't think she was just a hard worker who just, hey, I did it. I also didn't think she would just be, I'm a Palpatine. I didn't think any of that shit. What I actually thought is they were going to do something deeper, that she was going to be the reincarnation of Anakin Skywalker. Now, at first, that might sound really weird, but hear me out. If you have this trilogy, like there's a lot of imagery in that film, especially at the end where she's fighting Kylo. Kylo's bad, she's good. And you see this lighting effect that's constantly going between blue and red. That's symbolism 101 for which side is she picking. And you have the exact same imagery with Ben. You have that same thing where he's like still kind of fighting his light side when he kills, his father and stuff. What would have been an interesting course of this trilogy would have been Ben's course back to the light side while Rey goes to the dark side. You flip them over the course of the trilogy. We didn't see that before. And where you get that with Ben is, you can understand his storyline is different because he comes from the Skywalker family, etc. And he is using the false imagery of his grandfather. He remembers the Vader side. He's not thinking about the Anakin side. But what you do have is the other version of that, the yin and the yang type of thing. We know from Return of the Jedi, Anakin, he killed the Emperor. He actually killed the Emperor. And his light side once again became a Jedi Force ghost. But there is a dark side there. The Sith cannot become Force ghosts. But what if they can be something else? As they say, the pathway, the dark side is a pathway to many abilities considered unnatural. But, so, like, why not reincarnation? So he comes back in some form. The dark side of him is now completely devoid of the good side. And that manifested itself physically into Rey. Much like Anakin himself was a manifestation of the will of Darth Plagueis and Palpatine. If you didn't know that, they literally created him from nothing. They manipulated at the midichlorians, which I know everybody hates, but they did that. They manipulated that, and that generated the birth of this child. They just didn't know where he was until he was eventually found in Phantom Menace. So why could not that be a thing? You know, you get reincarnation. She's essentially born around the exact same time Vader dies. So she doesn't instantly just be like, I'm evil! Like, you don't do that because she's still a human being. And throughout the course of her journey, it just becomes like, you know, you went straight to the dark. You know, you did all these things that are awful. You know, she gradually gets to that point. And there are certain elements of that make sense. Like in Force Awakens, when she first touches, where it really starts to trigger for her is when she first touches Luke's lightsaber, which was Anakin's lightsaber. And what does she see? She has a whole bunch of memories of Vader's fight on Cloud City. Why would she remember that? Why would she have those visions? Oh, if she was a reincarnation, that would actually make a lot of sense. And then you would have in a second film the moment where both of them split, where you know you role reverse. She becomes the new like dark side user. He becomes the new light side user, etc. And yes, you would need a big supervillain who's overriding all of this. And it was obvious who it should have been: Plagueis. It should not have been the Emperor was behind it all the time, as it became in Rise of Skywalker. Oh my god. It should have been Darth Plagueis. And that's who Snoke should have been. Snoke has a terrible name. It should have been something completely different, like, I don't know, Darth Cacus, or I don't even know. It should have just been a completely different name. But Darth Plagueis, his whole thing was, you know, resurrecting himself. He would have been a perfect supervillain to manipulate Rey, because that was his end game from the beginning, was I want to manipulate the midichlorians to make a child of the Force who is pure darkness. Guess what? Rey was that, or could have been that, after you eliminated the light side that was Anakin. And then you have Ben Solo mirroring that same journey. Does that not sound like a more interesting trilogy? No. Instead we got Rey beat him. They blew up the Death Star again. Then the next day they were friends and they fought the old man. They killed him, and then they broke Star Wars with lightspeed suicide bombing for some reason. Oh, you're nobody. Oh wait, no, you are somebody. We get into Rise of Skywalker. Oh my god, I can't even get into Last Jedi. Like, Last Jedi truly... I do maintain that once you destroyed Starkiller Base, there was really no going back. That was, you broke it. But at least you could have possibly salvaged pieces of it in the second one. But they didn't, because Rian Johnson is beyond incompetent. He made a truly awful film the more and more I think about it. And he set it up in such a way that there was no possible way that Rise of Skywalker could be good. I don't even know where to start. Like, I kind of said it all a long time ago, and I realized the whole point of this discussion was supposed to be Rise of Skywalker, but let's summarize a little bit. It takes place immediately after Force Awakens, but you have characters acting completely different than their resolution in Force Awakens. You have you have the complete dismantling of Luke Skywalker as a character. You have all these horrible things, a million things that have been said a million times. So what I don't want to focus on that as much. What I want to focus on is how that actually happened from behind the camera. What happened was, after The Force Awakens came out and was generally considered good, generally people were happy with it, it made a ton of money, Disney backed off and they told, all right, Lucasfilm, which is a separate division, you guys did, you did what we said, you made a ton of money, you made everybody happy, you have carte blanche. Go make the next movie and make it good. So what we do know is that JJ actually did have some overall arc, but he decided to step away, which you can essentially blame him for if you want. He decided he didn't want to be bogged down in making Star Wars movies for like 5 years. He wanted to get away from it and just hand it off to someone else. Here's my outline, here's a whole bunch of stuff, I gave you a bunch of places to go, make it happen. Unfortunately, they handed it to Kathleen Kennedy. Now, Kathleen Kennedy, we now know, had a very political agenda with making her films. Or not her films, but the films. Whereas the other ones, while they were political, they were apolitical. They were like statements about politics, not here is my politics and my beliefs, and you should follow them. It's, not about... women can do everything men can do. It was more like people can do things. It was neutral in that sense. If you're following me. But she had a very specific goal with that. So it became about, no. Rey is the greatest thing that has ever happened because she's a woman. Luke is actually, you remember how Luke did all that stuff? No. He was just lucky. He wasn't Rey. Rey was truly a legend. And Luke turns out to actually be a piece of crap. Under any pressure, he buckled and he became a wuss. And then he killed himself because he's a loser. And really, it's Rey who did everything all along, including killing the Emperor, because Luke had nothing to do with that. Vader had nothing to do with that. Anakin, that's nothing. It was all Rey. Remember, she's all the Jedi. She's the best ever, which didn't go anywhere. Like, it could have been a thing. Like I said before, the whole reincarnation thing, it would have actually been interesting. Instead, she's just really good. That's the ultimate reveal, is Rey's just really good because she's really good. She's a Palpatine, but she's good, so it's okay. It's hard to even put into words like how frustrating that actually is. But the thing with The Last Jedi is, because Disney gave them carte blanche, Kathleen Kennedy had complete control of what to do. And she found Rian Johnson, who Rian Johnson, I give him credit for this. He was good at manipulating her. He told her what he wanted to hear so that he could make whatever he wanted. He was like, oh, I totally believe in men being wusses and women being so much more powerful, and only the women are in control. Like, Holdo, oh my God, she's amazing because she's amazing. And he just told her what she wanted to hear so he could make this ridiculous movie. I almost secretly wonder if he always hated Star Wars and just wanted to break it in half. I don't know. But the most selfish thing he did was conclude a movie that felt like you just watched the end of a really bad trilogy, knowing there's a ninth one. You're like, I don't know where this is supposed to go. I don't even care. You killed off... at the time that the movie was in post-production, Carrie Fisher had already passed away. So they knew they wouldn't have her for episode 9, yet they continued on as if they would have her. And they had Mark Hamill, who wanted to do more, and they killed him off because he's a man, so he has to go. It was like stunning levels of incompetence. And you no matter who got episode 9, they were pinned into a corner where a lot of the stuff that was set up in episode 7 was very incompetently resolved. And then everything was just kind of wrapped up with a message of like, hey, eventually this might work. Who knows? Whatever. By the way, do you like gambling planets? It was so stupid. It hurt the mind. And yeah, I genuinely pitied J.J. Abrams going into episode 9. That's why Colin Trevorrow left. He saw, what they were doing with Last Jedi. He's like, this is unfixable. You can't do anything from this point. And they still made it. So after everyone hated The Last Jedi, and if you like The Last Jedi, you're wrong. I'm sorry, you just are. I get it. It's bold. It did changes. It did things you couldn't predict. It's like, I couldn't predict if a car fell through my apartment right now, but that doesn't mean it's a good idea. It doesn't mean it's something that's supposed to happen. It's grossly incompetent. It doesn't follow any logical outline. It just made it very apparent there was no plan in place and that Disney was utterly incompetent with how they were going to present this trilogy. So you get to Rise of Skywalker, and the whole movie has to retcon massive amounts of Last Jedi, which in of itself did massive retcons to Force Awakens, which in of itself did massive retcons to the original trilogy and the prequels. And it's just like, dude, okay, fine. So I guess the Emperor is alive. That's really stupid. I mean, we know now that was a Bob Iger thing. He was like, look, everybody hated Last Jedi. You need to do some safe stuff again, like we did with Force Awakens. So people like the Emperor. Put the Emperor in there. He'll be back. They actually, I don't know if you guys know this, but after Last Jedi, Disney was desperate to fix the situation. So they went to JJ and was like, look, please help us. We know that Ryan screwed up. Help us. So he's like, okay, but I want like creative control. I want to go with George. We're going to make this together, blah, blah, blah. And Disney was like, yeah, whatever you need. And so they apparently did this completely different movie. It's now called the JJ Cut, that featured, I think it's actor Matt Smith, him from like Doctor Who. Presumably he played a character that was on the Clone Wars, who was one of the essences of the Force. Like there was these three characters. One, there's the father who represents neutrality, the daughter who represents the light, and then the son who represents the dark. Now, if you watch those episodes, the father and the daughter die, but the son you don't really know what happens to. This was supposed to be him. He was back and he brings out the dark side, and he was supposed to be behind everything all along. It connected to Clone Wars, but Disney eventually felt that was too generic or wasn't well known to mass audiences. They wouldn't know who that is, and you're just bringing him up now. Bring back the Emperor. People know who he is. That's fine, but they remember him. It's terrible. So they've essentially lied to JJ and just changed everything. It was like a movie done by committee to make absolutely no one happy. And I remember watching it the first time. In the first 4 minutes of the movie, it does everything it can to be like, oh, okay, the Emperor's back, and we're retconning. Remember Snoke? He wasn't real. He was like a puppet of the Emperor, which you just go like, well, that doesn't make sense because you can't even break it down. Like, there are going to be people who break down this movie in ways that will take hours. You know, with actual scene-by-scene things being like, yeah, so he said this because they were trying to fix this, but then it creates this problem. So, for example, here's a perfect example of this. They're like, okay, we want the Emperor to be the real villain. Well, how does that work? Because what happened to Snoke? The Emperor made Snoke. Okay, so we solved that problem. But then, wait a minute. Snoke wanted to kill Rey for some reason in the past movie when he now, turns out, Palpatine needed her alive, but Palpatine controls Snoke? What? You know why it's like that? Because that wasn't planned. It's just some stuff they had to cobble together. And this became... You're watching this, I remember laughing at multiple times because you just saw J.J. Abrams being like, fuck The Last Jedi. Not even in subtle ways. It's like, oh, look, that lightsaber they ripped in half? No, that's just fine now. Forget how that happened. It's fine. A story for another time, as Maz Kanata once said about that exact same lightsaber. She throws the lightsaber away, and Luke catches it and goes, never disrespect your lightsaber. I was wrong. Everything I said before was stupid. I don't know what I was smoking. You just see these like petty moments, and then you just get into this dumb stuff you can't even fathom. You're just like, oh, okay. So now they have 10,000 Death Stars, basically, because every Star Destroyer is now a fully armed Death Star. Wow. I can't... Oh, they can't fly up. They can't fly up. That's the convenient excuse for why it's okay to have a space battle. Oh, we're going for the Avengers Endgame thing where it's like, I am inevitable, and I am Iron Man. I am all the Sith, and I am all the Jedi. Oh, that might have worked if you had a setup. A setup. See, that would have been perfect in my version of this, where Ben starts dark and goes light, and by the end he transcends to become that one Skywalker that was meant to do it all along, versus the Dark Lord of the Sith they had originally envisioned. It's just... And then you have the Force Ghost stuff. That would have been... I remember sitting there watching this film and thinking, I really want to see a whole bunch of Force Ghosts from previous Jedi, including... Most I wanted Hayden Christensen as Anakin Skywalker in there. Like, it's his storyline, and all they give him is a single line of dialogue. Now, we know now that some of that had to do with China, and when they were trying to put it in the Chinese market, the Chinese don't allow movies with ghosts in them. So they were like, oh, okay, they're not ghosts, they're spirits, and they just limited it to like a couple, which is why they don't look like Force ghosts like they do in the original trilogy. They look like they're actually there. I guess there's some subtle difference that I don't know enough how the Chinese determine the difference between a ghost and a spirit, but whatever, there is some difference there that they actually had to go with, which is why why Yoda looks the way he does in Last Jedi and why Luke looks like he does in this movie. But they also limited it to just a couple of sound effects. I can't even, you're just sitting there laughing at how incompetent this was. And I actually don't blame J.J. Abrams for this. I completely put the blame of this particular film, not the setup to it, but what actually happened with this specific movie, on the foot of Bob Iger. Bob Iger's mandate to change it to be more fan-friendly, which was stupid, totally ruined that. I mean, really, like I keep saying, the original sin was destroying Starkiller Base. Starkiller Base, this would have been the time to destroy it. It would have been that looming threat throughout the whole trilogy. It's been doing chaos and damage throughout the whole galaxy, but it's also creating the same problem the Empire created, which was you're creating enemies. And at the end, you have all those enemies, if you will, all of the rebel fighters from across the galaxy. They come together to fight the big baddie, the now possibly some way destructible, Starkiller Base. That has, the Rey, who is the evil force at this point, no pun intended, along with Plagueis. I mean, yes, it's very Return of the Jedi, but, it rhymes as poetry, whatever. And that's just a rough outline off the top of my head. If I actually sat down and they're like, hey, man, this is, 2012, and we're giving you creative control over Star Wars, I probably would have done a little better too. At least as far as a story outline, I would have actually, mapped one out. I think that people will be looking at the Disney trilogy for years to come in an exercise in gross incompetence in management. Because at the end of the day, that trilogy is only about one thing, which is, no. Skywalker saga isn't about Anakin. It's not about Luke. It's about some badass chick you never heard of who somehow is better than all of them, dismantles everything they ever did to become better than them and become the actual Skywalker who balances the Force or whatever somehow. Plus she has a yellow lightsaber now. And the more I sit on this, the more I'm just going to think of things that piss me off. There's the Carrie Fisher thing. Like, I don't blame the film itself for only having 8 minutes of deleted scenes to work with. I blame Rian Johnson for not. I mean, you had a scene in which she died in the movie, and they decided no, keep her alive anyway. That way, it's the next director's problem. And the hilarious part about that is, even after you have that, the Carrie Poppins scene, as everybody calls it, where she just flies back into the ship on Last Jedi. She doesn't do anything for the rest of the movie. She's like in a coma for like half of it, and then when she's up, she's just like, I don't know, follow him, do this, whatever. She has that one nice scene with Luke, but by the way, that's not really Luke. It's a Force projection. That was beyond incompetent, and in fact, if you actually shot that footage and you just kept like her dead, like in the movie, you would have a whole bunch of extra footage to potentially use in flashbacks and things like that you could have worked in the best way possible to you, again, considering the tragic death of Carrie Fisher. But, it just hurts. And then they did major retconning with her character, by the way. It's like, oh, no, you never saw it, but she was a fully trained Jedi Knight. She just didn't, talk about it. In between Return of the Jedi and Force Awakens, right after Return of the Jedi, look, here's some CGI footage of her training, and she was the best. She kicked Luke's ass. She was the best ever because she was a woman, and that made her the best. But she decided to stop because she didn't know what would happen with Ben. Now, in Force Awakens, they established more or less that she never went down that path, and that she, had to send Ben away because she was like, I don't know how to teach him how to do this stuff. So she just looked like a bad teacher. Now she looks like a bad mother on top of it because she did know how to do all that shit. And she was like, yeah, fuck it, I'm lazy. Send him to his uncle. I don't care. So now she looks like an incompetent mother. You didn't make Princess Leia look like a better character. You didn't make her look like a strong, symbolic female character. News for you, she was already that. You made her stupider. You made her worse. You made her look like a terrible mom. How is that good? Oh, because she held a lightsaber in this scene, so she was cool. That's all that matters. God, it pisses me off. Because I sit there and I just go, this trilogy had so much potential and so much hope. To go back to A New Hope, of course. You had this vibe that they could have done everything right. It wasn't... And in the end, you look at it and you compare it to the prequels, and you go, I honestly think the prequels are better films. I hate to say it. They're not, in a lot of ways, they're not made better, but their story outline is different. They go somewhere. They have a point. There's plenty of incompetent aspects to them, but they do seem to function better. They're going somewhere, whereas the new trilogy is just about some girl who is really good, who, by the way, is better than everyone. That's it. That's it. That's it. And it pisses me off, man. It really pisses me off. And I'm going to stop on this now, though. All I can really say about this is Rise of Skywalker made me just mentally accept that the Disney trilogy just isn't canon. Like I was saying with Star Trek before, you pass the torch to this other group that doesn't understand how it became what it was. It doesn't understand that good storytelling and good continuity and all obeying the rules of its own universe is what made it successful. And you just go for, well, that would be cool. And that people think they want that, so do it because money. And you break the universe. The new Disney trilogy broke the Star Wars universe in many ways. I mean, some are just stuff they had to retcon, like the Lightspeed attack, the Holdo maneuver, as they call it. by making it possible to use lightspeed ships as a weapon, you broke Star Wars completely. Because now the Death Star scene, the original Yavin 4 Battle of Yavin, the trench run, anybody with an X-Wing could have just been like, yeah, we don't need to do all that. I'll just lightspeed the ship with a droid on it straight into the Death Star and it'll blow it up because physics. See, the thing is, lightspeed was always kind of considered not really physical. It was like dimensional travel. You couldn't run into stuff. And, that was the whole reason. In A New Hope, they set up this thing about how, hey, you would bounce into a supernova. You would get too close to this thing and you would just die and tear up. You can't use it as a weapon. That was kind of an unsung rule. But Last Jedi said, no, it's fine. Anyone can just kamikaze into something. It's fine. So then this movie has to explain, like, oh, no, that was actually, like, really hard. She couldn't, the odds of her doing that were 1 in a million, which, by the way, I saw somebody point this out. If the odds of it were 1 in a million and Holdo knew that going in, that means she was actually not trying to sacrifice herself to destroy the ship. She was trying to escape and be a coward, which is kind of funny because I hated Holdo as a character. And therefore, not only she was an incompetent coward, she also was a really bad pilot because she accidentally did a 1 in a million maneuver to destroy a ship. She didn't mean to do that. She meant to escape like a pussy. And it's just like, you just see behind the scenes that J.J. Abrams and Rian Johnson hate each other, and they're just doing this tug of war fight with each other. And I don't blame J.J. for this because it was Rian Johnson who created all these problems, or most of these problems. Man, yeah, I got to stop there because it'll never end. I will never stop complaining about this. And Rise of Skywalker, though, it's hard to take it as a movie by itself because it most certainly doesn't function as a movie by itself. It does not function as the end of the Star Wars saga as we know it. It just is this thing they had to do because they said they would, and they were just patching up problems as best they could. But really, in my mind, the Disney trilogy can't be canon. I wish it was possible for them to just come out and say, you know what, we're wiping those from continuity. They never happened. We're going to do a real episode 7. But now you don't have Carrie Fisher to work with, so you have different problems. And we know they're not going to do that. They'll never admit to that. What I think they're going to do now is we're hearing a lot of rumors about, they're going to do like Old Republic movies because fans have been asking for it. And you hopefully can't screw with continuity too much by going that far into the past. And I think that it's actually hilariously ironic. When Disney got Star Wars, they canceled Clone Wars almost immediately, and they wanted to get as far away as possible from the prequels. They wanted to stop associating Star Wars with that era of Star Wars. They pissed off the fan base by canceling a very good, very successful show, which incidentally they apologized for and are now bringing back to finish it off, which says something. But they wanted to, they did Rebels, which to their credit takes place between the prequels and A New Hope, but it takes place much closer to the A New Hope side of things. And technically, of course, Rogue One is a prequel, but only by like 2 days. It's very much associated with the original trilogy. They wanted to distance themselves from that because everybody hated it. Now they've locked themselves into a position of like, well, now we have to distance ourselves from our own trilogy because everyone hates it. It's just stunning. It's just absolutely stunning. So now you can't just make movies that take place in between the original trilogy because you'll screw that up too. And that might be why Rogue One is, in my opinion, the best of the 5 Star Wars produced Disney movies, or Disney produced Star Wars movies. And it's an okay movie. There's elements to it that are really good, and there's elements of it, like the characters themselves, that are really not very good. But it's just like, that's the best you got. Out of 5 movies, that was the best we got, in my opinion. And you kind of have to make that case, because you can no longer look at Force Awakens and use the statement of like, well, hey, I know it doesn't resolve stuff on its own, but it's going to go somewhere. Because now we know where it goes, and it goes nowhere. It doesn't go anywhere. So Rey isn't a reincarnation. She's not something really super special. She's just shitty writing that goes from like, no, she's nothing to, no, wait, she's a Palpatine, which explains a lot, I guess, somehow. No, it doesn't, but it's so frustrating. They're not going to tell other stories inside of that era of Star Wars. And I know they're talking about, we'll do an episode 10, 11, 12. It's like, does anybody care? Does anybody care? I mean, Daisy Ridley herself is like, I don't want to do more of these. There was an interview with her talking about that. So you're starting all over again from a standpoint of nobody gives a shit. I don't care what happened to the First Order after Rise of Skywalker. I don't care. I don't care what happened to the Resistance. I don't care about any of that. It's destroyed, man. It is completely destroyed. The only way you win is if you completely throw out the Disney trilogy and say, yeah, you know what? Let's try it again. We now have to start from a point of, here's episode 7 that takes place at this point. I guess Princess Leia died off screen. We can start with a funeral scene for her. And the thing is, Harrison Ford and Mark Hamill are pretty old now, man. You're going to do that. You got to start that off fresh, and you got to start that production soon. They're not going to do that. They're absolutely not going to do that. And I have to sit here and think, like, when I do my future Star Wars marathons, I have to seriously ask myself, like, when Return of the Jedi ends, do I just stop watching? And that depresses the hell out of me, because that's not how that should have gone down. With regards to Bob Iger, though, like, I mean, this dude is the dude who he greenlit the Solo movie. He based that on, oh, Solo is a popular character. People like Han Solo. They like Harrison Ford. Let's just, we'll do another Solo movie, which is, I remember saying this for years, even when that was rumored. It was like, that is not a character that needs his own movie. It doesn't need to exist. There are so many other characters that people would vastly prefer to see. And I remember talking about, I want to see an Obi-Wan movie. Ewan McGregor is age appropriate. This is a story about a guy who's got the weight of the galaxy on his shoulders because he failed. And now he has to deal with that while simultaneously checking in on the son of the person who was his friend, who now is like creating tyranny throughout the galaxy. It's a much more dramatic tale. And you have this incredible talent team in guys like Dave Filoni, who, studied directly under George Lucas, who gave us Clone Wars, which admittedly started off terrible, but when he got more creative freedom to do it his own way, it became amazing. It became the thing that made the prequels better. It actually fixed a ton of problems with the prequels, and you actually go like, okay, the prequels are no longer movies that, set up the Clone Wars. It was like the Clone Wars show is a show that has a couple of movies around it for context. I don't know. It was so good that it swapped it all. And the dude then went on to do Rebels. And again, Disney mandate. The first season of Rebels is very mediocre because it's like, you have to do certain things. And then when they let him take control of it, it actually started getting really good. And by the way, he's the same dude doing The Mandalorian, which I haven't seen yet, but everyone says is amazing. Now, I believe firmly that Kathleen Kennedy is out. I think that they are just waiting for that to end. I believe that your new talent team is going to be Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni. They're going to be in control. Jon Favreau, of course, this guy doesn't get enough credit. I think a lot of us know who he is at this point. You probably best know him as an actor who shows up in a bunch of stuff. He plays Tony Stark's assistant, Happy Hogan, in the various Iron Man movies. But here's the thing. He should get a lot more nerd credit. He's the guy who made the movie Elf, which I personally didn't like, but it became one of the most legendary Christmas movies every year, right up there with your Home Alones and Christmas Story and so on. He is the dude who directed the first 2 Iron Man movies, so he essentially started the MCU. He continues to perform in it, and now he's the dude helping to resurrect Star Wars, as far as Disney, proof that Disney can do something not incompetent with it. And I feel like that dude, they should just let him take over. And what did he do? He set Mandalorian just shortly after Return of the Jedi, which is a nicer era of Star Wars that people like. I feel like let that dude do a Star Wars movie that goes Days of Future Past on the timeline and somehow deletes all the events of the new Disney trilogy. Set it after Return of the Jedi and just do something with that. That would be I know it'll never happen, but that's just what I want to see happen. And I hope that we just get more of that general direction. All right, I'm stopping there for real because it will go on forever. So I only have one subject left, and it's just a very short one. I can't really talk much about it, so I just want to say, guys, I have a very exciting project coming up, and I can't wait to announce it. It's going to be something that's very cool that hopefully opens up a lot of new avenues and chapters in my life. Don't take this as a negative thing. I'm not going to stop doing YouTube or anything like that, but I'm excited for where things might be going very soon for me, and I'll let you guys know as soon as I can. we'll leave it on that cliffhanger, that mystery box, as it were, story there. So thank you very much for watching. Once again, thank you to all the Patreon backers for supporting. Quick again, shout out to Trey Wagner, Luis Bonilla, Michael Kelly, Jesse Perez, Joseph Tamburino, Eric Perales, and Caleb Bravo. Thank you to everyone else who is also a Patreon backer, and thank you just for people who are just listening to this in general. Thank you very much. Please like, comment, subscribe, and all that great stuff. Check out the Patreon if you want to be involved in this in any way, shape, or form, and I'll see you all later.